welcome to the .NET Core podcast, the only podcast which is devoted to .NET Core, ASP.NET Core, EF Core, SignalR, and not forgetting the .NET Core community itself. I am your host, Jamie Taylor, and this is episode 67, Blazor in Action with Chris Sainty. In this episode, I talk with Chris about Blazor and his new book, Blazor in Action from Manning Publishing. Chris is a Microsoft MVP, speaker, and creator of a whole heap of open source stuff around Blazor. Search for the Blazored hashtag to find them all. So let's sit back, open up a terminal, type in .NET New Podcast, and let this show begin. So thank you ever so much, Chris, for spending some more of your time talking .NET with me. I know that you've got, we talked earlier on just off air that you've got so much stuff going on, especially with a new little one. So congratulations on that, and MVP and the book that you're writing and all of these hundreds, 11 bajillion, I think is the actual number of open source libraries you've got going on. So thank you ever so much for taking some time for that. I really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Jamie, as always. And thanks for having me on. It's, love the podcast.
Thank you very much. So for the new listeners who may not know, you have actually been on the show before, back in, I believe it was, I wrote it down, July 2019. So this is a second appearance. I think there's only one or two people who've been on the show twice. So you're in a very exclusive club right now. So it's not as exclusive as the MVP, but, it doesn't have the benefits of the MVP, unfortunately. Just your face is on the website twice.
Oh, wow. I feel honoured now. That's it. And I also feel inspired to somehow get the hat trick. So, yeah, that's pretty cool.
We can bring you back and talk about Blazor next time if you want.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I've got this new book on order. I'm not going to tell you where I found out about it, but I'm hoping to learn some stuff and maybe apply that to Blazor.
Excellent. So, perhaps for some of the folks who weren't around, weren't listeners, subscribers, whatever, during the first time that you were on the show, I was wondering, could you give us a quick, brief rundown of who Chris is, what he does, and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Chris Sainty. I'm a developer, principal developer at a startup in London called Deployed, which I'm pretty proud of because they're a female-led, female-founded startup, tech startup. So I work with some very clever ladies who are a real joy to work with. So that's really good. I am also a Microsoft MVP of 2 years now, actually, which is quite cool. I've got a load of open source libraries I work on called Blazor. So that's all packages for Blazor applications. I've got my blog, which is chrissainty.com, although I am neglecting that a little bit at the moment. And that's because of the other thing, which is I'm writing a book for Manning called Blazor in Action, which is taking up a lot of my time. And then, as you also mentioned, I've recently become a father. So I've got my little boy Archie, me and my wife. So he'll be 8 weeks this Thursday. So there's a few things. There's a few things going on.
Wow, well, congratulations on all of that, I have to say. It's always wonderful to hear when things are going really well for someone, and it's wonderful to hear all of that. Excellent.
Thank you very much. Congratulations
on all of that. Okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. And like I said, you were on the show before. My goodness, at the time when this episode is planned to go out, because Insider Baseball will record these a little bit ahead of time. This is going out in January 2021 if everything goes well. So that means that you were on the show 2.5 years ago-ish.
Yep.
My maths is really bad, but that'll do.
Yeah, that'll do.
So, and last time we talked about Blazor, and it's been a long time since we talked about it. There's so much new stuff to talk about, but I won't attack you with loads of questions specifically about Blazor because I want to talk about the book as well.
Yeah.
So, you talked about the book. Can you give us like a brief overview of what is it for beginners? If I want to get into .NET, is it the way to do it, or is it just I know some .NET, I want to figure out how to build something in Blazor? What's the elevator pitch, I guess?
Yeah, cool. So the book is aimed at kind of people who do know .NET. They're familiar with sort of fundamentals of web development and things. but that's basically the base requirement. So as part of doing the book, we kind of define that the reader, the target reader. So the target reader for Blazor in Action is someone who's, probably had a year or two of .NET Core experience. They can build websites. They know a bit about, they know the basics of CSS, HTML, JavaScript, stuff like that. And they're just looking to start to build more advanced applications with .NET. So that's kind of the entry level for the book. And then the whole idea behind the book really is to take you from that level and work you through all of the various features of Blazor. And by the end of it, hopefully you kind of come out of it with a well-rounded understanding of the framework, what's possible with it. Hopefully, you've been able to learn a few tips and tricks along the way that hopefully will shortcut you from some of the common pitfalls and things like that. For more advanced users, for people who maybe had a bit of Blazor experience, hopefully there should be stuff in there for that level of reader as well. It'll be a bit more towards the back probably, where we talk about, we've got a chapter on performance tuning Blazor apps and things like that, unit testing as well, because that tends to be something that a lot of people shy away from in SPA frameworks and UI level stuff. So we'll talk a bit about that and stuff. So hopefully there'll be a bit of something there for everybody. That's kind of what I'm hoping. But one thing it won't be is like an ultra deep dive into every little nook and cranny, because in all honesty, most people, while it's fun to know that kind of stuff, that's probably better for blog posts, I think, rather than books, general purpose books anyway. Certainly the level that we're going at.
Sure. I mean that makes perfect sense, right? What is it? I forget the name of the principle, but there's a principle of like 80% of, is it something like 20% of the knowledge is all that you require to do 80% of the work or something like that?
I know the one you mean.
Like that,
I know, because it's always the one that you use when you're trying to work out whether something's important to do in the next sprint. And it's like 80% of the value comes from 20% of the work, and the last 20% takes 80% of the work, or it's something like that, isn't it?
Yeah. But I mean, like the point I'm getting at is that it would be, like you said, it's great to know if you want to. It's great to do that deep dive and learn about the lowest level of how everything fits together and how it's all working. But if you're making a CRUD app and your boss is saying you got 2 weeks to do it, you got to learn the way to get from no app to some app in 2 weeks, right? And learning all that low level at the bottom rung, all of like how it all fits together is maybe not your target at that point.
Yeah, definitely. And I think as well, being someone who's I've spent probably, since Blazor came out, really, I've had my nose in the source code. And the thing is, if you start talking about line by line implementation details, it goes out of date so fast, because the moment a refactor happens, the code doesn't do that anymore. And now, when you've got a blog post, you can update a blog post relatively easily. But if you've got a printed book, that becomes a bit harder. So I think what we're sort of trying to do in the book is give you that detail of what's going on under the hood to help you with things like troubleshooting and trying to be creative in your solutionizing, but without giving you like the granular detail that really doesn't probably add that much value and stuff. So I'm getting a lot better at diagrams and flow charts and stuff like that to sort of describe what the intent of the code, I think, is probably the better way to put it. Because I think that's the thing that's a bit more timeless. And that's hopefully something that will then be useful to people for sort of longer than that particular version of the framework is out. So yes, that's the goal. But then there's always the techie in me that wants to go into the nitty gritty, and my editor is very good at pulling me back and going, no, that's too far, Chris.
That's fair enough. There's always like an element of joy in like, there's this really cool thing I found out and I know how it works. Check this out. It'll blow your mind when you read it. Totally get that. Get that. I'm forever doing that with like my brother or, my other half. I'm like, check this. This is amazing. And they're always like, so what we having for dinner?
Yeah. Yeah. Oh dear. Yeah.
No, I totally get that. So, okay. If I sort of put my I don't know anything about Blazor hat on, I know that Blazor something Webassembly, something no more JavaScript, right?
Yep.
So for the folks who are maybe sort of new to the idea of Blazor, is that what Blazor is? Something WebAssembly, something, no more JavaScript? I mean, I know that we talked about it last time. We said, yeah, what's great about it is you don't have to do JavaScript. Like, is that still the case, or is it still like what's the deal?
Yeah. Oh, so there's so many things that we could talk about just from that sentence. So, let's deal with the JavaScript one first, because I always think that's a really interesting conversation to have, because obviously, yeah, one of the selling points, that are marketing points for Blazor, is that you can write apps in C#, and that's real .NET code that executes in the browser, and you don't need to use JavaScript anymore. And obviously that's not a lie, because obviously they wouldn't be putting that over marketing material. Microsoft solicitors are far too good for that. So, but I think I sort of talk about it a little bit in the book, and make the point that while you can achieve a lot without JavaScript, there's certain scenarios where you might actually choose to use it because it's just the better tool for the job. And I love C#, I love .NET, but I've been a web developer for my entire life. I started building websites with a friend of mine from school when we were 16 for like local businesses. So, and I'm going to be really controversial now saying this as someone's doing this, but I've always got a bit of a soft spot for JavaScript and things like that, because really it's kind of the underdog that should have never achieved what it's achieved, but it has. But I get why people don't like it. I get why it's quirky. I've pulled my hair out time and time again with it, and you don't get that with C#. It's just a very well thought out, nice language, and in my opinion at least, and for the apps that I write. And again, I know there's some people who have different opinions, and that's fine. That's all good. But just from my point of view, and I think it really comes down to the type of app that you want to build. If you're going to build a bog standard CRUD app, line of business, maybe internal app, that kind of thing, you could probably write it without any JavaScript whatsoever. And you could probably make it pretty sweet. Like, it will probably be, you could probably make it pretty funky. You could have it doing some cool stuff and look very slick, and still not use JavaScript. But when you want to build some really advanced UI designs with it, there are just times where certain things are just easier to do through JavaScript. There's certain APIs that are only available through JavaScript, and Blazor doesn't have access to things like the DOM yet. So if you want to, and browser APIs as well. So there's certain scenarios where you just don't have a choice. You have to go through those things. But then again, having said that, the more popular Blazor gets, the more NuGet packages there are that wrap those JavaScript APIs. And you can just install those instead. And it then becomes a rather interesting interesting discussion then of whether you're using JavaScript or not if you're using someone else's library that uses JavaScript. Because I've sort of seen discussions on Twitter where people have been adamant that an application is using JavaScript, even though they don't write any JavaScript in that application, but they rely on a NuGet package that does JavaScript interop. So then I don't know. I mean, I don't try not to get involved in those discussions because that's just not really going to go anywhere. But that's one of the great points, I guess, about Blazor, is that if you don't want to do that JavaScript side, then have a look on NuGet, because chances are somebody's probably, already done the work for you. I saw a project not very long ago where someone was actually trying to wrap every JavaScript API in C#. I don't know how that's going, or if that ever actually got anywhere. But there are people trying to do these things to make your life easier. So yeah, I've gone off on a complete tangent there, talking about loads of different stuff. But I think to bring it back to the point of JavaScript, you can achieve a lot in Blazor without writing any JavaScript whatsoever. And the longer Blazor's out, the more you can achieve without writing JavaScript. I think it's just when you get more advanced scenarios is where JavaScript does start to come into play a little bit more. And you might need to. And also just sometimes there's certain things like chart libraries and things like that, for example, that are really battle tested. They work really well. They're really feature rich. Why do you want to try and recreate that from scratch? When you could, wrap a few API calls and then you can deal with it in C# from that point forward. But you can take advantage of all of those years of, millions of users testing it and running it and optimizing it and all of that kind of stuff. That's where I think, there needs to be a bit of a sensible decision really about, which way to go. But yeah, so I've gone all over the place with that, but yeah, so lots you can achieve without it, but every now and then you do still need to delve into it.
Sure. I totally get that. That's that age-old argument of you pick the tool that works for the situation you find yourself in, right?
Yeah.
What's that old phrase? When you have a hammer, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right?
Yes.
If all you're doing is .NET, then yeah, maybe you might get a little upset that you have to do some JavaScript. When all you're doing is JavaScript, you might get upset you have to do some .NET. And the same for any language, right? I don't want to pick exclusively on JavaScript. Java, C, Go, Dart. I'm trying to get all the SEO by saying all these, right? It's the same thing, right? All of those different tools and techniques are there for us to pick and choose the right one for the job at hand, right? Because otherwise, we'd be doing machine learning in C or machine learning in .NET. But for one reason or another, Python seems to be better for it. So let's do it all in Python or let's do it all in R. It just makes sense, right?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. So what about I mentioned WebAssembly, you mentioned WebAssembly. Blazor is a WebAssembly technology. Do I need to know WebAssembly to use it? Is me saying Blazor is a WebAssembly technology a misnomer? Am I talking nonsense? What's that all about?
I don't think it's not. So I think the way I describe it is WebAssembly is an aspect of Blazor. So Blazor has this principle of hosting models. So in Blazor's architecture, there's a separation between its like app model, its component model, and where that model can be run. And those things are called hosting models. So Blazor originally shipped with a hosting model called server, Blazor server. And that meant that basically your Blazor application executed on the server, and then a Signal R connection was set up with the client. And it is a bit like a client terminal sort of thing, client style thing. So everything gets sent from the browser to the server to process, and then UI updates get sent back down to the client and the browser gets updated. And that's still going, that's still there, that's going strong and everything. But then in May of this year, we got Blazor WebAssembly. And Blazor WebAssembly is something that I think a lot of people were probably more excited about, which was the fact that you could now run your app, your real .NET code in the browser natively without having to do any, it wasn't secretly transpiling to JavaScript and all this kind of stuff. It was genuine .NET DLLs being executed in the browser natively using web standards without any plugins whatsoever. And that web standard that enables that is WebAssembly. So WebAssembly became the fourth language of the web back in either November or December of last year. So the W3C officially, ratified it, recognized it, whatever they do. So it now sits alongside HTML, CSS, JavaScript as an official thing. So it's not going anywhere. It's there to stay. And the way it ties into Blazor is there's a .NET runtime that's compiled to WebAssembly. And that's where Blazor WebAssembly gets its name from. But your code doesn't get compiled to WebAssembly. Your code is still compiled to normal .NET DLL, so it's ultimately IL there. And they get downloaded to the browser along with this runtime, and then some JavaScript bootstraps that .NET runtime, that WebAssembly.NET runtime, and then that loads library code, and then it loads your code. So that's how that all fits together. So I think a lot of people often refer to Blazor WebAssembly when they're referring to Blazor as a whole, because that's kind of the bit that they're interested in and they're focused on. And I find talking to a lot of people, everybody kind of has a different way of what they mean. And often it starts with a problem and you're like, okay, well, which hosting model are you running on the server or are you running on the client and going from there? But that's how the WebAssembly part fits into all of this. But the kind of, I won't go too far into this, but obviously the really exciting thing with Blazor is the fact that you can just keep adding these hosting models. So, Blazor isn't really just limited to being a web technology either. It's basically a UI framework for wherever you can build a hosting model for. So we've already seen experiments with Electron and Steve Sarnason's web window project. And Elon Lipton has been doing mobile Blazor bindings, which is using the Blazor programming model on top of Xamarin Forms technology, essentially. And we know now from Microsoft that Blazor will hopefully be a programming model in Maui, in Maui.NET as well. So when you talk about Blazor, it's really difficult sometimes to really encapsulate everything that you could potentially achieve with this framework, over the next few years. You could genuinely have a framework here that you could learn and build any kind of UI in, which is quite an exciting prospect, I think.
It really is. Even before you throw Blazor in, you've got, I want to say .NET Core, because we're recording this ahead of the .NET 5 release. The .NET 5 release candidate shipped, I think, release candidate 2, I think, shipped last week, the week before. So we're recording this in the past, right? So what I'm about to say is probably outdated by the time it gets released. So I'm tempted to cut this out, but I'm going to leave it in. When people were saying to me, I think it was, I think it was Jim Bennett, when he said .NET Core can run on your computer, on your tablet, on your server, on your phone, on your watch, on your TV, on your fridge. And I'm like, wow. And then we're saying the same thing technically is possible with, from what you were saying, then technically is possible with Blazor, because it can wrap all of these APIs and all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like, there is almost no limit to what we can do, right? Mm-hmm. Or is there? I don't know.
Yeah, I think it's getting, I think it's a really interesting time to be a .NET developer, because there are just so many places you can run .NET apps now, and it's growing, and the places that it could run before, it's getting better, and we already know, we've known for a long time now already that .NET Core was, a very, very performant runtime, and .NET 5 is building on that as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting and exciting possibilities. Obviously, I'll caveat everything I said with the mobile stuff and whatever is technically experimental at the moment. So there's no commitment officially, I don't think, from any of this. It's just kind of they're looking into it. But I think just the fact that they're looking at it is a really interesting thing, and everybody I seem to interact with who's used these experimental models seems to be really excited about it and really enjoy writing apps that way. And I think really that's your key metric, isn't it? If your developers are excited building apps using that technology or that programming model or whatever, that's a pretty good endorsement of what you're building.
That's it. Once the developers have fallen into that pit of success,
yeah,
that's how you know you've made it, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think that's why. That's why I think so many .NET developers are want to build with Blazor and want to get away from JavaScript, because at the end of the day, how much of a soft spot I've got for it. There are so many quirks of JavaScript that do exactly the opposite of what you just said. It's they throw you at the pit of failure. With a lot of force sometimes. Whereas you don't tend to get that with .NET, and you don't, the .NET ecosystem, it does try to just help you along the path. And there's a lot of value in that, because then you can focus on building the business value or whatever it happens to be, and not fighting the framework or the language or whatever, which is always a good thing.
Yeah, definitely. I do remember there was something that you'd said on the previous episode, and I'll encourage listeners to go back and listen to that one too, when you'd said, with Blazor, what's great is if I need a new developer, I'm on a team with .NET devs. I don't need to go out and find someone who is very strong with JavaScript in order to work on the front end. I can, if they are able to do JavaScript stuff, but also it means that we have this common language between the developers who are working on the entire stack of the system. They're all using the same tool. And so if someone has a problem or if there's a quirk, we can work on it together. And we don't have to sort of switch contexts, switch language domains, switch technologies constantly in order to continue on, right? Which I'm guessing, now this is conjecture on my part, that must increase the velocity of the team. Now, this, again, you may only be able to answer this as conjecture, right? No one's done any studies, but if you're using the same technologies as everyone around you, surely the team as a whole would be faster at delivering whatever value they're delivering, right?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, it's by no means remotely scientific, but at my old place, the team I was leading there, we rewrote an app that had been written in React. And that had taken about 4 or 5 months to build. And we rewrote the basics of it in a week. And in a month, we had the entire thing up and working to the same functionality that was in the other version. Now, that by no means is anything derogatory against the team who wrote the React app. But it kind of shows a bit about what you were just saying. They were .NET developers who had to learn React and learn the tools around it. And get up to speed and then find that maybe a tool they picked wasn't right, like the testing library didn't work very well, so then they swapped the testing library and that meant rewriting stuff and all of this. And then there's, the quirks of moving from an object-oriented language to a functional language, and do you use TypeScript or do you not use TypeScript? And then which part of the, which particular build tool do you want to use? Do you use Webpack or, any of Browserify, any of the other bits and bobs? Not to mention, even stuff like getting it running locally and dealing with calls properly and all these types of things that come up. Whereas, I mean, my team, like I say, to be completely fair, as you would probably expect, my team had Blazor experience. So we already knew about that framework and whatever. But what I do think that story shows is that you can build stuff very, very rapidly when you know that technology already. And I mean, when I first introduced my team to it originally, none of them had kind of looked at any docs. They hadn't gone ahead. They weren't really, they were focused on other stuff. They weren't really looking at this. And this was very early on when everything, before Blazor Server was released, everything was experimental. And I gave them this task. I gave them 2 hours and I said, right, here you go. Here's this thing, right? Try and build this app. And just see how you get on. Like, obviously, Google things, whatever, see how you get on. I say, if you come across a blog called chrissainty.com, just ignore it. It's probably rubbish. All of them built the app. And what was really interesting for me is that out of the 4 of them, 5 of them who built that app, there was like 3 or 4 different approaches to it. So I thought that was quite an interesting, it was quite an interesting thing for me, because I think not only could they get their heads around the framework enough to solve, the problem I'd given them, which was relatively basic. It was essentially some CRUD with a little bit of extra in it, but but not only they met the brief, they'd done all this stuff, they'd also not been limited in any way to the solution that they picked. They'd been able to, vary and do it in different ways and still achieve the result in the time and all this kind of stuff. And that for me was like a really interesting point with Blazor, because I was like, well, these are a load of people who, they're not like me. They're not like, obsessed with it and whatever. They're just, good developers who are just, there to, write good apps and not really too fussed about what they're doing it with. They just want to be productive. And so the fact they built this stuff and the way they did it was just, I thought, really, and then for the next week, they were all like, oh my God, right, when can we start using this? It's in preview, we won't start using it yet. But, but yeah, so that I think was a really interesting point. And the more people I speak to who are getting into Blazor, they kind of all go and build something with it. And like, oh my God, that was a lot easier than I thought. Like, I want to list out a list of items, and I just do a for each with an li in it, and I've got a list. Like that's how easy it is. I know how to do for each. I've been doing them in C# for years, so it's just same thing, except it's a piece of HTML in the middle, not another C# expression or call or whatever. So it's interesting.
Yeah. I think you've raised a couple of really important points there about like around tooling, and do we use TypeScript, JavaScript? Do we use Webpack, Browserify? What do we use? Whereas like I feel like the C#.NET toolchain is literally one toolchain. Yeah. Right. Everything's set to the same, and everything's set to the same version number. Like TypeScript 2, TypeScript 2.1, TypeScript 1.8. I worked on a project a couple of years ago where, we were getting pretty far into it, and then we hit this stumbling block where one of the developers was using the TypeScript compiler version 1.8, and the rest of us, or 1 point whatever, and the rest of us were 2 versions or 2 minor versions ahead, and we had access to stuff that they didn't. And then they were like, well, how do I get the updated compiler? You got to go, well, I'm not using Visual Studio, so I've got to use npm and get the right version from there. And then do you pin it to that? Do you not pin it to that? And just like everything goes out of whack. And then, I don't want to pick on npm, but left pad, one person removes a package and everything stops working.
Yeah.
That can totally happen in .NET too, but it doesn't happen as often.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have such disastrous consequences. So, I'm picking on JavaScript now, and I really don't want to. But I totally agree that you can, if you are a C#, .NET, F#, whatever developer, and you already know the tools, and then somebody just goes, hey, you can do this extra thing without having to learn all new tools and install new tools and then slow your build pipeline down and all that kind of stuff. It feels like it would make me faster at something. And I think you're right about building something with it to get your head around some of the simplicity. Triviality? No, triviality is the wrong word. The simplicity of going, oh, wow, here's a thing, here's a component, here's a block. I remember it was back in the 0.03, I think, days, or 0.30 days. I put together a Blazor, which is a little front-end app that just pokes at the Pokemon API.
Yeah, I remember that.
And then takes that JSON, converts it into a .NET thing, and then just, right, here's a Pokemon. This is whether it's shiny or not. Here are the attack values it does. Because my brother was like, I want something to do Pokemon with. And I'm like, okay, I will throw this together. And you could just search for a Pokemon based on its number, and it will pull it back. And it's really basic, but like, it is a basic app. But I learned a huge amount about Blazor just by doing that, like the callback tree, the how to do C# functions and stuff like that. All of that it all just sunk in and all made sense. And that was a super early version. That's when everything was not necessarily breaking really quickly, but like,
oh no, I think that's a fair thing to say.
You build something, the new version comes out, nothing works.
Yeah, that was an interesting time. Yeah, my editing button on my blog post was on fire during that period. Yeah, that was I think that's that's probably a good thing to say as well about that. I mean, that's the other thing about Blazor is just the speed at which features are added. You got the interesting thing for me is that 2.5 years ago, maybe longer, or maybe getting on for 3 now, this framework didn't exist. Like it was maybe an idea in Steve Sanderson's head, and the fact that it's gone from that to a production level framework that you can build some decent apps with in that period is pretty impressive, and it's only getting better. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm not ignoring the limits of the framework, but what I often see is people sort of trying to tear it down because they're comparing it to something like React or Angular and saying that it doesn't have XYZ or doesn't do XYZ and things like that. And it's like, well, what is it? Angular's 7 years? Is it 7 years? React must be a similar number. And I'm talking about Angular 2, not Angular JS and things like that. So, it's not really a fair comparison considering that, like I say, the WebAssembly version has only been live since May, so less than a year, and Blazor Server will only be a year old in November. So comparing with a 7-year-old framework is probably a little unfair. But then on the flip side of it, I think the fact that people are already comparing it to 7-year-old frameworks kind of also shows how far it's come in that time. Because if there must be something that's making them compare it to those frameworks, because why would they otherwise? So yeah, it's really interesting to see how it's coming on and what's going on with it. But yeah, sorry, I was having horrible flashbacks of editing blog posts back then. It's yeah.
I suppose that happens when you're at the forefront of any technology, right?
Yeah, I mean, if I'm going to break myself here, but if you're silly enough to be writing in-depth blog posts about a preview framework from version 0.1, then you've kind of got to be expecting to be editing your blog posts on a fairly regular basis. So yeah, but I mean, I just thinking back, like, when we first started using Blazor with the first preview, and you think we only had like the on-click directive, and I think on change on there was like 3, I think, in the 0.1 preview. It's crazy to think how far it's come. It really is.
Yeah, and it just, like you said, it just needs maybe at the moment a NuGet package or two to bring in whatever API that you're saying, oh, well, it doesn't do this. And it's like, well, NuGet add package done. It has it now.
Yeah.
And then maybe it'll be there in the next version. I'm not Microsoft. You're not Microsoft. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. But if the support is there already, then why not, right? Yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I mean, I think I'm right in saying they're talking about, potentially putting in things like drag and drop for, maybe .NET 6 and stuff. So, all these things are coming, and I mean, you can do those things now, but these common UI problems, I think that's where Microsoft is going to be an interesting player in the front end space, because, the JavaScript community, sort of the years it's spent working with that technology, and that it's very much a community led, drive to fix problems. So, somebody will hit a problem and create a package for it, and off they go, and things like that. But that also is kind of slightly the Achilles heel, because then you get 3,000 packages that technically are all solving the same problem, but which one do you pick? And when was that one's not been updated for 2 years, and that one was updated last week, but it wasn't updated for like 3 years before that. So is that okay? And you end up having to be like a bit like a super sleuth trying to work out, is this thing going to be okay? And stuff. Whereas I think with Blazor and .NET and with Microsoft the way they are at the moment, it's kind of like, well, they just want to let you get on with solving the business problem as easily as possible. So it's like, well, if there's a benefit to putting a feature into the framework that's a common enough thing to warrant being in the framework, then it's up for consideration. And obviously, the great thing about .NET now is that it's all open source. So if you want something and you've got a valid use case, you can go and raise an issue, and you will, the team will listen to that. They will, they will respond to you. They might not always respond what you want to hear, but they will, you can at least make your argument. And, there's plenty of features that have gone into Blazor that have been community driven features. And I think that's a big testament to things as well.
Absolutely. And, I think I don't want to discount the fact, I feel like I'm picking on NPM and I'm picking on JavaScript, but you're saying, we can't really compare a 7-year-old framework to something that's less than 2, right? Or less than 2.5 or whatever. And I think you're right. And I wonder whether part of that is because .NET has a standard library. JavaScript doesn't. Angular is maybe 7 years old, but JavaScript goes back to 1995, 1994, right? And some of the same problems existed then that still exist now, right? And that's because the community has had to come forward and say, hey, use this library, use this thing, right? I still remember a time when there's memes and jokes about it now. You would search for a problem. I have this problem with JavaScript, and the answer would be use jQuery.
Yeah.
Right? Like, how do I add 2 numbers together? Use jQuery. Yeah. Well, why would you, but maybe that's because there isn't a standard library, and maybe because C# has a standard library, it's a slightly, I don't want to say better fit, but for some developers, maybe having that standard library, here's a bunch of types and features and APIs and stuff that you can use that has already been vetted, has already been used, and it's already being kept up to date. And here's the latest version. And it's been, it's being maintained because, like I say, it's completely open source now. And then, you could dive in and say, right, okay, I'm having this problem. Here's a bug report, or I'm having this problem. I'd love to have this feature, wallop. And then the community comes in, and I think they still use the thumbs up and thumbs down emoji to do the voting, right?
They do,
So if you can get enough people voting, we need to do this, it will eventually be added to the roadmap. Like,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, well,
Brilliant.
they were, again, this is kind of time traveling because obviously, like you say, we'll be in January, won't we? So, but yeah, back in current time of, October, the .NET team have been sort of on a big drive asking people to actually go on GitHub and upvote the issues they want and help them prioritize. Really trying to make the point to people that, you can actually affect the roadmap. Like if you want something, and there's enough people want it, go and upvote it. And if it's at the top of the list, then that's what they're going to look at. And again, obviously there's always going to be caveats that there might be a limitation technology wise why they can't do it or something like that. But, generally speaking, it's going to at least have some serious consideration, which I think is a really, I think that's a really good thing. I think the only thing that you obviously have to be wary of is with a single custodian of a community is that you don't, that you always risk losing some diversity and that kind of thing with that model. Just to make the point that I'm not just sitting here as a fanboy, there's plenty of disgruntled people who have felt very, kind of stamped on by Microsoft because they've had an open source package that's very successful, and Microsoft have just come out with a frame, added that feature into a framework instead of maybe contributing to the community version. And of course, then the community version just gets left by the wayside because generally speaking, most people in the .NET community will go with the Microsoft option over the community option. There's a few, I've read a few blog posts from people who have been like, right, next version of .NET, I've seen that they're bringing out this feature, so I'm shutting my library because I'm not going to waste any more time because I know that when that comes out, 70% of people who use my library will just stop using it because they'll just go to the Microsoft one because it's Microsoft. And I think that's a bit of a shame. Just like I say, just add some balance to it here is that I do think that is a bit of a shame. I think there's some times where maybe there could be better support of an existing community project over bringing it into the framework sometimes. But I also get why, because you've got very big companies who have a lot of money riding on certain bits of software and they need that reassurance that they can go and bang on Microsoft's door if something stops working and not some guys, working really hard and trying to do it in evenings, weekends or something like that and maybe can't get something up. So yeah, it's definitely a double-edged sword, but I think there is still probably more benefit to it than anything really. And I think as long as it's always a discussion, as long as the community can always input, then I think it's not too bad.
Yeah, definitely. It's a thing for smarter people than me to figure out. I know that much.
Me too.
It's just it's a difficult one, like you say, because but I mean, do you end up going down the JSON.NET route and go, hey, James Newton King, why don't you come work for us?
Yeah,
because like that falls into what people call the extend, embrace, extinguish. Like you don't want to do that, but then if there genuinely is this thing that everyone's using, like JSON.NET, it makes sense to bring it in because it's part of the whole experience. But then people might get upset about that. Or I totally get it. And I think going forward, we have we need to have like I said, smarter people than me need to have that discussion about this open source thing. How do we support it properly?
Yeah.
And maybe the current level of support is enough, and I just don't know. I'm holding my hands up. I really don't. I don't get it. I'll happily use a package if it helps me to solve the problem, but then also I'll happily use the framework if it helps me to solve the problem. So maybe I'm part of that problem.
Yeah. No, I think that's the point. I think at the end of the day, most of us are, we're being paid to solve a problem as efficiently as possible. And at the end of the day, if it's built into the framework, most of us are going to just use that because why would you waste time researching an open source package when, if there's something already there and you don't even, because you probably wouldn't even think to try because you'd be like, there's the answer. It's right there in front of me. So it, like you said, it's not an easy thing. And the whole, we could probably talk for several episodes about open source and how you sustain a good ecosystem. And it's definitely something that I listen to a lot. I listen to a lot of people, as to coin your phrase, a lot smarter than me, who are trying to work those problems out, and I'm just kind of just trying to learn really from them. And I've got a small toe really in the open source world, and relatively speaking, compared to the people who are doing this like really big style and stuff. And I definitely can see some of the pain points that people have, when you get someone who opens a very snotty issue because they've been inconvenienced because they wanted to do this thing, and your library hasn't done it the way they wanted to, or they've found a problem, but they can't be bothered to tell you how to repro it. They're just like, well, you wrote it, you need to fix it. I've got other things to do. I've got, I'm being paid to write software, not fix yours. And it's like interesting perspective there. Because when my software was solving a problem for you, you weren't thanking me, you weren't contributing, you were just probably, getting some applause from your boss that you did something quicker than you thought you were going to, or whatever, which is great. And that's great. I love that. That's part of why I do open source. But you can't come at me like that when there's a problem and treat me like you're paying £100 a month license fee or something like that, because that's not fair. And that's, that's not and that's a very small minority of people that do that. It's tiny. I can count on, one or two hands in the last 2 years, the people who have done that kind of thing. And there's hundreds who don't. So, but there shouldn't be those people at all. It shouldn't be a thing. But anyway, I won't keep going down that, because like I say, it's just such a complicated thing, the open source world.
Yeah, it is. So let's shift gears back towards Blazor then, right? We're recording this ahead of .NET 5 coming out, which I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, has the shorter of the support life cycles, because I believe it's the even numbers that have the long
even numbers
support.
Are LTS, yeah.
So presumably lots and lots of new features coming out .NET 5 for all of the different .NET things, right? But we're talking about Blazor. So having looked into the source code, having looked into the release candidates, and obviously I'll caveat whatever you're about to say with, we're recording this ahead of time. So some of this may not be true, or it may be only partially true, or you may just be lying to me. I have no idea. But when it comes to Blazor in .NET 5, what are some of your favorite things, the things that you're super excited about with Blazor, with the brand new version that's about to drop any moment now in recording time, but has already dropped by the time people are listening, which I feel is like a challenge to you, because Microsoft can change their mind and just turn something off, right?
They could technically, yeah, definitely. So there's probably two things that I really like. There's probably more actually, but they're the two that come to mind right now. Is there's CSS Isolation, which has been something that the community has been pushing for a very long time. So again, it's an example of what we were talking about a second ago of Microsoft listening to the community and building features that the community want. So CSS Isolation has probably been the most requested feature for Blazor since it, very, very, like even before it first came out as a GA product, So that's really great. I like the way it's been implemented. They've used the Vue.js's sort of model for scoping CSS, which is from, at least from what I've read and understand, is a sort of really well liked and sort of well thought of implementation. So that works really well. And funnily enough, and this is mainly because I do build these libraries, is the JavaScript isolation. So it's called JavaScript isolation, but really it's not. It's JavaScript module support, really. And it allows you to dynamically load JavaScript modules on the fly. So that's the reason I'm excited about that, is because as a library author, I can now dynamically load any JavaScript I need to, because a few of my libraries do use JavaScript, and I can dynamically load that now without having to have the consumer add a script tag to their Blazor app, which I think is just a nice usability feature, because, a good chunk of the issues that get raised on my repos when a version changes is because of a cached JavaScript file or a cached CSS file. So for me, those two features kind of move us away from sort of some of the common problems that I hit, which is really good. But there's some other stuff in there, like there's the virtualization component. So this is a component that will take, long, huge lists of data and stuff and virtualize it so it only shows, the portion that's visible in the viewport. So, you can load a list with like 10,000 items in it, and it's only going to show you the 20 or whatever it is that you've physically got on view, and maybe a couple either side of that to make it a nice smooth scrolling exercise. But that's a great component. I think that'll be very useful. And what's really cool with that was actually built by an intern. So that was built by an intern at Microsoft on the Blazor team. So kudos to him. And I've completely forgotten his name now. So if he ever happens to listen to this, I apologize. But he's on the one of the .NET community stand-ups. They did what now will be a few weeks ago, maybe a month ago, where they kind of introduced all the big features coming in .NET 5. So and what was the other one I was going to call out? Oh, head tag manipulation. So SPA frameworks and this is not a Blazor problem, this is just any SPA framework, always have kind of had this issue around, SEO and creating the true page navigation experience by changing meta tags and page titles and everything, not just the URL. And with Blazor, there's been no built-in solution for that. So you can do some JavaScript interop to manipulate the head tag. You can do, seen some sort of versions where you have sort of two root components in a Blazor app. One of them is in the head tag, and you literally sort of build the head tag dynamically as well. But now there's a solution out of the box in .NET 5 where you can set your title of your page using a component now. And then when you navigate between pages, you have that component on each page and set the title on each page, and it just changes every time you navigate. But you can also add and remove any other elements in the head tag as well you want. So if you want meta descriptions, meta keywords for SEO, stuff like that, you can build all those into it as well. So if you're doing that and you're doing pre-rendering, then you're going to probably be doing okay SEO wise. You should be able to sort of get the usual SEO sort of, or the basic SEO markers. Again, I'm not going to try and claim to be an SEO expert because that's another black box that I don't think, no matter how much I read about, I ever understand. So that's another, I think that's a good one. And, that one again, even if, a lot of the time, a lot of apps in .NET tend to be more line of business or maybe not public anyway. But I think it's just nice from a user experience that you can have a different title on the browser tab when they move around and things. I think that it's just a nicer user experience. So they're kind of the four things that I kind of really like. But I was sort of really sort of fortunate enough. I got asked to do a keynote for a South American Blazor event, which was really, really awesome. And I did a talk about what was coming in .NET 5, and I was doing some research then on actual numbers, and there's I think I pulled out like 15 features that are coming in .NET 5, and I think the overall number of issues that actually got merged for .NET 5, I'm sure I heard someone from the .NET team say this was around 50 in total. So that's more like the bug fixes and general performance and framework changes, because obviously moving to .NET 5 and the changes that came with that, which I just think is phenomenal considering they've worked on a very compressed timescale for .NET 5, because up until May, they were working on Blazor WebAssembly, which was .NET Core 3.2. So up until then, they were fully concentrated on that. So the Blazor team has only really been working on .NET 5 features since May. So I think to build all of that stuff into the framework in that period of time is impressive. So that anyway, that was, they're my key picks.
Cool. Okay. I'm interested with the CSS. Did you say CSS isolation?
Yeah.
Is that similar to, let's say I'm building something in a modern JavaScript framework with Vue.js, or rather Vue, I guess is the new name, Angular, React, that kind of thing. I've got a block of HTML, a block of JavaScript, and a block of CSS that's only relevant to that component, right?
Yeah.
Is that same idea?
Yep. Yeah, so exactly right. So the way that it works with Blazor is you have your component file. So I'll use the always popular counter component that's in every Blazor demo in the world. So yeah, you'd have your counter.razor file. So that would be your component code. And what you do is you create a style sheet with the same name. So you create counter.razor.css. So you use that convention and the framework will pick that up. And then you can, you've probably got quite a few of these because you've probably got styles for each of your components. So the framework will actually, during the build phase, will pull all those together and bundle them into one file, which will be the name of the project .styles.css. So, right. So if we had a Blazor WebAssembly app, for example, could be a Blazor server app, doesn't really matter, and it was called I don't know, Awesome Blazor. So yeah, the output style sheet would be called awesomeblazor.styles.css. And yeah, so you just put that one style sheet reference in your head tag, and the framework's going to bundle all of those styles up and put them in there for you. But the key point is, what it does is it generates a unique key on each HTML element. So it adds it as an attribute at build time, and they have the same structure. So it's B hyphen and then like a random like alphanumeric string. And then all of your CSS is rewritten and it's scoped to that attribute on that block of HTML. So that means all of the HTML elements in a component will all have the same ID, and all of the classes get written to that ID, rescoped to that ID, which obviously then stops any CSS bleed between the components. And again, it's quite useful if you're consuming library code, because if you've got a class called container and someone else has got a class called container, you then end up like, which order do I need the style sheets to go in, or do I need to put like exclamation mark important on mine so it overrides that one on, and the whole problem goes away with scope CSS. So yeah, it's a really good feature. Like I say, a lot of people have been asking that for a long time. So funny enough, I sort of use it a little bit, but I'm using Tailwind Css a lot at the moment, which is a utility based CSS framework. So in a lot of ways, I don't kind of take advantage of the scope stuff as much as I probably would have. But whenever we write custom CSS, we're now using that because where I work, we're running on the previews of .NET 5. So we've been playing around with this for a while now. So and it works really well, which is really cool.
Cool. I like that. And it's a nice to have, even if you're not using it, right? It's full of all of these. We talked about it before, right? All of these framework features that maybe you're using, maybe you're not. It's kind of nice to have support for iterators and for link and CSS isolation, those kinds of things, just in case you need to use it. Hey, we've solved this problem already. Here's how you can leverage that solution. That totally makes sense to me.
Yeah, that's cool.
Awesome. Okay, so as we wrap up then, tell us a little bit more about the book, if you can, like where we can get it from. Is it available now? I know that at the time of recording, there's like an early access program going on. I don't want to pressure you into giving a release date, but by January 2021, is it out, or is it still a work in progress? So, what's that all about?
Oh no, if only. Yeah, so the book is in MEEP now, which is the Manning Early Access Program. So in that program, you can buy the book. There's different packages, I think, as well. You can buy. So you can buy like the digital version, but you can also buy it with the physical copy that will get sent to you when it gets printed and stuff like that. So you can do that. And basically, what happens during the MEEP period is you will get, depending on when you buy it, you will get all the chapters that have currently been released to MEEP. And then you will get some new content every month as I write it, really. But one of the nice things and the good benefits of the MEEP program is that you get to feedback on the book. So you can leave comments on the live book forum, and you can sort of give your feedback about what you think about the approach, or if something's missing, or if you don't like the way I've explained something and you think it could be better, you can make the suggestion, and you can basically have a chance to influence the final outcome. So, it's Manning are brilliant. They've got, brilliant people, and they put, a really serious amount of resource behind us authors who are writing these books. But, obviously getting input from, the end reader is always nice as an author, and, constructive feedback at least. And, that can really be useful when, especially when you're writing something and you're not, you maybe got a few ways you could have done it. You pick away and you're like, not 100% sure if that was the best way. So having some people look at it and go, actually, I really like that, or I'm not sure, that's still not really very clear. Maybe if you could explain that in a bit more detail, and then you can shift it. Because again, while it's in digital, we can change it. But once it goes to print, then that's it. That is locked in at that point. So, so coming to your point about, or your question about timelines, in January it will definitely still be in Meep. I now know why people say, like, you really need to think before you write a book. It's very challenging. I think at the time of broadcast now, I'm writing chapter 3 for the third time. So far I've written chapter 3. The versions I've written is getting over 50 pages because of iterations. So I think I've had a 45-page version of it, a 17 or 18-page version of it, and I'm a good 17 or 18 pages in again for the third version. So it's just one of them that it's just been my bogeyman chapter that I just like. I don't know what it is. It's been a pain. So, but I think I've got it this time. I think I've got it licked. So yeah. But hopefully I can get my head down, get a few more chapters under the belt, and it will be released next year. So that's the goal. So at the time of broadcast this year, so 2021 is the goal. So yeah, fingers crossed. As long as I've still got my marbles.
Excellent. Okay. So I'll what I'll do is I got a couple of links from you and put them in the show notes directly to the Meep page. Or if you're listening in the future, maybe it's the same URL. I don't know, but we'll figure it out. We'll get those. And definitely go check it out because I feel like Blazor is one of those technologies, like you say, it's got all of these different hosting models, and it's going to be something that goes forward, right? Because as far as I'm aware, you don't have. Well, okay. One last question, right? If I'm building something with Blazor, I know that Blazor kind of hangs off of ASP.NET Core and the Blazor pages and MVC and stuff like that. Can I bring some of that in, or am I locked just to Blazor, right? Because like if I'm making the technology choice for my app, and maybe I'm solution architect, maybe I'm tech lead, maybe I'm technology CTO or something, and I'm saying, right, you're going to build it with Blazor. And somebody says, and I say, I'm going to build it with Blazor. And then 6 months in, we go, well, actually, we kind of need this API thing, or we need these controllers, or, can I mix and match? Because it's all one framework, right?
Yeah, no, definitely. So the way around it works is you can put Blazor components into Razor pages or into MVC views. That's fine. What you can't do it the other way around. So you can't host a Razor page in a Blazor component, for example. If you kind of stop for a minute and think, it kind of doesn't really make much sense, because the Razor page is a server construct and the component is a client-side construct. So it's while they both deal with HTML and they're both using Razor, they actually work very, very differently, because a Razor page gets compiled to a string of HTML and a Blazor component gets compiled to a C# class that has a special method that when that gets run by a renderer, after all of that, eventually some HTML comes out in a certain way. So they don't really go together in that way around. But yeah, sure, you can just plug in the bits you want. So one of the hosting, one of the file new projects that you can do with Blazor is a Blazor WebAssembly with an ASP.NET Core backend. So that gives you the APIs and stuff like that, and then you can actually the API project actually serves the Blazor project and stuff. So it all kind of everything works together, which is it comes back to what we were saying earlier about .NET being able to do so many things. You can now use all these technologies together to create the thing you want to create in the best way to solve your problem, your version of that problem, which is like I say, I think that's the exciting thing about .NET.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I mean, that covered something that I completely forgot to ask earlier on, but that's on me. So thank you for for covering that up. So what about finding out more about Chris? I know you said earlier on the chrissainty.com blog is kind of being put to the wayside a little bit because of the whole, you've got all of these hundreds of thousands of things going on and the book. So is it check the website? Is it Twitter? What's the best way to find out?
Yeah, so I feel so bad about my poor blog. I love my blog, and I'm actually weirdly excited that when I finish the book, I can get back to writing blog posts, because I used to do a blog post every week, and I really miss doing it. So I'm looking forward to getting that done. So you've got my newsletter you can sign up to on my blog. So if anything changes, there'll be something set out there. So there's that aspect, and I do try and post an occasional blog post whenever I can. They just tend to be a bit shorter than what I usually wrote on there. But yeah, you can get me on Twitter. It's Chris_Sainty on Twitter if you want to get hold of me, although I'm not always the most I don't tend to post huge amounts. I try to just post something that's useful and not run on too much, but so yeah, that's probably the best way. Either of those routes is probably the best way to get hold of me, I should think. I'd say if you saw me at a conference, come and say hello, but we don't really have face-to-face conferences anymore, do we? So
No, not at the moment, but once the unfortunateness has calmed down, we'll be able to maybe start doing it again.
Yeah, definitely.
Who can say?
Yeah,
excellent. Okay, well, what I'll say to you, Chris, is I'll get some more links from you off air, and everyone should just go to the show notes. There'll be a full transcription down at the bottom of the transcription, handful of useful links. So definitely check those out. And Chris, thank you ever so much for taking some time out of your evening. I know that you've got a lot of stuff going on, and you've got the little one to look after and all that kind of stuff. So I feel bad for monopolizing your time now, but thank you ever so much for agreeing to be on the show again. No, not at all. Thanks for having me again. It's been my absolute pleasure, Jamie. It's I'm looking forward to that hat trick. It's going to be good. That's it. Well, we'll have to put out a poll. Should Chris be on the show again? And, I don't know. I don't think my ego could take that. The no's flying up. No. We'll maybe have to do a poll of what do we get for people who are on the show 3 times. Set up a reward scheme, and then we can have like competitors. Yeah, and like a league table or something. I don't know. Excellent. Well, like I said, Chris, thank you ever so much. It's been loads of fun. Cool. And I'm looking forward to reading the book when it comes out. So best of luck with that, and best of luck with all of your projects, and especially best of luck with your little one as well. So thank you ever so much. Cool. Thanks, Jamie. Cheers. That was my interview with Chris Sainty about Blazor. Be sure to check the show notes for a bunch of links to some of the stuff that we covered and a full transcription of the interview. The show notes, as always, can be found at .netcore.show, and there will be a link directly to them in your podcatcher. And don't forget to spread the word. Leave me a rating or review on your podcatcher of choice. Head over to .netcore.show/subscribe for ways to do that, and to come back next time for more .NET Core goodness. I'll see you again real soon. See you later, folks. The .NET Core podcast is a production of RJJ Software Limited.